Hello, and welcome to the SANS webcast, Feeble Security Culture, Disconnected from Business Objectives, which is part 3 of 4 of the Rekt Casino Hack Assessment Transformational Series. With us today, we have Lance Spitzner and Russell Eubanks, who are the co-authors of Management 521, Leading Cybersecurity Change, Building a Security-Based Culture. With that, Lance and Russell, I turn it over to you.
Oh, wow, that was fast. All right, thanks, Laura. Hey, folks, I'm Lance, and that is...
Hey, Russell here.
All right, folks. Hey, we're going to make this fun. We're going to make it informal, and we're going to make it short. Russell and I will probably only take about 30 minutes of your time here, if not less. We know you're busy, but we're also going to be available for questions afterwards. So please post your questions in the chat channel and the Q&A channel. Otherwise, we can also discuss anything you like afterwards. But with that said, let's go ahead and jump right in. So as mentioned, today we are going to be talking about security culture with the Rekt Casino organization. If you're not familiar with it, folks, this is actually a series of webcasts. We've already had several webcasts on the organization Rekt from different perspectives. So we'll give you a little background here on Rekt in just a moment, but Rekt Casino is a simulated incident for a simulated organization. And we're looking at it from 3 different perspectives about the lessons learned and how we can apply those lessons to real world environments. So we took the perspective already from a strategy, and that's based on the SANS Management 514 course, how you need to ensure your security program is aligned with the business strategic priorities. Then we had a fantastic webcast that looked at the entire event from more of a technology and framework perspective. And that was based on Management 512. Today, we're going to look at the same organization and the same incident, but more of from a culture perspective. And to do that, both Russell and I will be sharing some fun lessons learned. So, Russell, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Russell Eubanks, glad to be here. Lance and I have been working for over the last year at building out the class Management 521 around culture, really understanding what that means, ways to measure culture, and as Lance described, in this time that we get to spend together today, go through some of the material from class and then give you some questions that you can ask when you go back to your respective day job to assess and look for ways to improve the culture of your organization. And we're going to do that by applying these lessons, as Lance said, from the Rekt Casino hack.
Russell, this is the part where you're supposed to say your bio too, your background.
So been privileged to teach with SANS for last 11 years. My last full-time job, I was privileged to be the CIO and the CISO at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Very dialed into what a good culture looks like, the benefits that you get by having a strong security culture that aligns the mission, vision, values of your security team to give value to the organization that we're privileged to work at. And so really a student and I guess an evangelist of what would it look like to do that type of work. And again, we'll be talking about that today.
So what's really cool is Russ comes from the background of senior leadership, executives, very business focused, where my background originally when I started 20 years ago was from a very highly technical perspective. So I did a lot of work with Sun Microsystems, forensics, penetration testing, firewalls, honeypots, cyber intelligence. And what's interesting is yet both Russell and I have converged both to the same point of focusing on the human side. As we've all seen, you can have the best strategy in the world, you can have the best technology in the world. But if you have a toxic culture, if you're not focusing on the human side also, that's where so many organizations break down today. So what we're going to be showing you is security is not just a technical challenge, but it's also a human challenge and a cultural challenge. So we're going to be sharing a lot of lessons learned that you can apply at your own organization. We're just using the Rekt Casino environment as the framework to show all these lessons learned. So, speaking of which, Rekt Casino, if you've already been to any of the other webcasts, you already know about it. But if not, just the 30-second overview. Rekt Casino is a fictitious organization that has experienced a ransomware attack. And unfortunately, in this situation, Rekt Casino was not prepared because they were in no way invested in security. They really had a informal security team consisting of 3 technical individuals who are focused primarily on system administration, network administration, and manning the support and help desk. So very small team with absolutely no dedicated security resources, no security framework, really no security strategy, leadership, things like that. And in fact, when they experienced their incident, they actually had to reach out to a sister casino company who had experienced something like this before and be handheld through the process. So that's the incident we're using as the example today. But before we jump into Rekt Casino and the lessons learned, Russell and I just wanted to take a step back and share with you some of the key elements of what a security culture is and why do we care. Now, what's exciting is Russell and I are seeing more and more people talk about security culture and the importance of security culture. But what we're not seeing is anybody defining what it is, why we should care, the benefits to us, and most importantly, how to build and measure a strong security culture. So Russell and I are going to share a couple of the key points from this the Management 5-to-1 course and show you what culture is all about and why we should care. Russell, anything you'd like to add before we get started on this?
No, that's it. Let's do it.
All right, game on. All right, folks. So, first of all, one of the challenges, and Russell and I have seen this because, like we said, we've been in this 20 plus years, is far too often when it comes to the human side, you see the technical community have the attitude or the approach of, you know what, you just can't patch stupid, implying people are the problem, it's their fault. What Russell and I want to share with you and challenge you to think is perhaps instead of blaming people, instead of considering them as the weakest link, perhaps we should take a step back and go, maybe we're part of the problem. And the short answer to the question is yes, in some ways, we are the problem. And when we say we mean the security community, especially the very technical side. Technical is important, but we have to take the human in perspective also. Let's show you what we mean. 20 years ago, it was very easy to hack into the default installation of a Windows computer like XP, NT. The life expectancy of a default installation was 3 hours. I know that for a fact based on my research with the HoneyNet project many years ago. Now, Microsoft felt a tremendous amount of pain and in that 20-year period has implemented a tremendous number of security controls, making Windows far more secure by default. As a result of all of these technical innovations, and by the way, this is just high level. As a result, if I take the latest Windows computer, put it out on the internet today, it takes weeks, months, years before somebody hacks into it. That is until the human touches the keyboard. As we all know, when people interact with technology, all bets are off, and that's where we see our real risk. But before we start blaming people, ask ourselves why. Think about it. If we've done all of this to secure the Windows operating system, what have we done in the past 20 years to secure the human operating system? Windows stores, processes, transfers information. You and I store, process, transfer information. We're nothing more than another OS. Unfortunately, compared to technology, we've done very little to secure people, to reach out to them and train them in their terms. As such, we have created a very vulnerable operating system. I would suggest we have become so good at using technology to secure technology, we're literally driving the bad guys to target people. So as we've gotten better at securing technology, you can look at that exact same curve and go, at the very same time, we've seen an increase in human-based attacks. Nowadays, if you pull up any intelligence reports like the Verizon DBIR, Microsoft's Digital Defense Report, CrowdStrike, FireEye, the vast majority of attacks today are initiated or based on human-based attacks or even human error. So Russell and I would like you to just start thinking and take a step back and go, instead of thinking as people are the weakest link, instead of thinking they are to blame, Russell and I want to challenge you to start thinking perhaps they are the primary attack vector, not the weakest link. Because when you say people are the primary attack vector, that stops blaming people and starts blaming, in some ways, us. Not blaming us, but putting the responsibility on where it is. People shouldn't have to worry about security. We should create an environment and enable them to be secure. And that's what culture is all about. Russell,
You know,
anything so far?
and I'd say, that's so important. It's easy to point fingers. It's easy to blame that stupid user, which I hate hearing that. I just hate it. But I know it's prevalent. I know it's been used. I know maybe it's funny or cute to say that. But like Lance is suggesting, when we look at that and say, okay, what is it about our security program that did not train them, did not equip them, did not communicate that to them in a respectful way so that they can see they're part of the fight? They are the primary attack vector. So much more respectful, so much more likely that people are going to listen to your message when you treat them and show them the respect they deserve. Look, they're experts. Your colleagues are experts in other fields, be it finance, be it marketing, be it sales, whatever it is. And they could very quickly, put you to shame or put us to shame and the things that they know that we don't know.
I like that.
When you take this approach, all of a sudden we can say, okay, what is it? What is it I can do better? What was it about my leadership that caused that to happen? It's not going to be all, but there are opportunities for us to tailor our message in a way that's better, more respectful, and more likely to be adopted by our colleagues.
All right, fantastic. I just could not agree more. Whenever I'm working with an organization and I hear a member on the security team say, Lance, awareness culture doesn't work. You just can't patch stupid. I know we've got a big challenge, and it doesn't start with the employees or the workforce. It starts with the security team. Your security culture often starts with the security team. All right, once again, we keep throwing this word culture around, but let's take a step back and define it. And I'm going to define it using a term by Dr. Lance Hayden, who published the book People-Centric Security. And in that book, he compares security culture, or just culture, to an iceberg. And the idea being is culture, like an iceberg, is hard to move, but culture, like an iceberg, is hard to see. The vast majority of your culture is what people believe, their values, attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs. Culture is also made of what people say and what they do. That's the part you can see. That's the tip of the iceberg. All right, so I'm going to use this fancy highlighter here. So if we look, behaviors and artifacts, that's the part of the iceberg, the culture we can see. Everything underwater, we can't see. By the way, you'll see Russell smirking. I stole this idea from him, so thank you, Russell. So when we say culture, that's what we really are focusing on, people's attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs. So when we say security culture, what are people's attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs towards security or towards your security team? Like I said, your culture is often driven by people's experiences interacting with your security team. So what is it? Their shared values, attitudes, beliefs, perceptions towards securities. How do they feel about security? How do they feel about your security team? And some of you may be going, why do I care? Because the stronger your security culture is, not only will you have a stronger, more secure workforce, but you'll start seeing more and more of your security initiatives succeed at a much greater level. A lot of times, why does vulnerability management fail? Not because of technology, but because of the relationship between the security team and IT ops or the IT admins. Why does DevSecOps fail? Because of the relationship or the interaction between the security team and the developers, the culture. Could be said for same thing for a lot of different types of security initiatives. Have a big single sign-on initiative rolling out, a big EDR rollout. A lot of times those initiatives fail ultimately not because of the technology, but because of the culture and interaction from a security perspective. So we've defined what culture is. We've defined what security culture is. People then ask me, Lance, what are the indicators of a strong security culture? How do I know if we have one? Well, here are just some of the many. And look at this. We're not using statistics. We're not using quantitative measurements, though you can quantify it. And we'll get into that in a moment. But it's more along the lines of how do people feel? And probably my absolute favorite one is the very first one. Do people in your organization feel safe reporting that an incident or reporting a compromise, even though they know they caused it? In other words, we spend a lot of time teaching people how to report. But if you have a very punitive culture, an arrogant security team, and people are then afraid to interact with and or report anything, you may have incidents. You may have people trained to detect those incidents, but because you have a bad or toxic security culture, people are afraid and will not report it. In other words, when they get infected with ransomware, they're more likely to pay the $100 and then recover their system than have to report it. Russell, any key indicators or clues that you really like or use?
Yeah, so one that resonated with me, and I totally made this up at my last job, is I had what I need a better name. It was called the cafeteria test. Back when we like worked assembled together and went to the cafeteria at lunchtime, and it was this: when I get my cafeteria tray and I walk around deciding when I'll get a healthy or something or not so healthy something, and I spot one of my colleagues off in the distance, and I see that they see me, do they walk towards me or do they walk away? Oh my God, there's Russell. He always tells me no. The last thing I want to do is see that. Or is the perception, is that belief, is that assumption such that there's a partner? Russell helps me do things. He helps me realize more value. And I did that for myself for a while and actually caused those that I was privileged to lead to do the very same thing, to go take the cafeteria test, to see that nonverbal display of when you show up, or when the culture that you're representing shows up to your other colleagues, whether now it's on a Zoom call or whenever we do get to go back to being in person and seeing each other in person, but what do they react? Is it a, I can't wait to see and work with Lance, or oh, there's Lance, all I ever get is no? And then you can use that as a way to measure. And when you get that look of, what can you do to improve it? Can you reach out? Can you say no less? Can you help them? Can you understand them and help meet their needs in a better way? So that's a practical thing that you can do even over Zoom. How do you show up and how does the culture show up to your colleagues?
And then Russell brought up a great example of a bad security culture where people avoid you because you're you're Dr. No. Hey, can we, social media online? No. Hey, I want to banking online? No, no, no. But it's not just that. It could go, Russell's a great guy. He normally says yes, but then when he explains how to do it, I can't understand him. He explains in all these technical terms, and I walk away just feeling stupid, confused, and intimidated. That's another indicator of a poor or weak culture. And a lot of times that's what I see happening also. It's not that the security technical community is bad or arrogant. Sometimes we can be, but a lot of times we communicate in a way that nobody understands. It's called curse of knowledge. The more of an expert you are at something, the worse you are at communicating it, because you and I live and breathe security every day, and it's simple for us So we assume it's people, it's easy for the rest of the world too. Bad assumption. So many times I've seen a security team push out an email, a policy, a process. To you and I, it is so simple. But to the rest of the world, we're overwhelmed and confused. No different than a doctor starts talking to you or me about a healthcare condition, and we quickly get lost too. So when we say good, strong indicators of a strong culture, here's some examples. Or as Russell and I just mentioned, there's also some bad examples. Russell, I love your cafeteria example. So another strong, to kind of follow up on Russ's point, look at the last bullet point in the slide. A strong, healthy culture, people are reaching out to the security team. Hey, can you brief us at this virtual meeting? Just drop in on this Zoom call for 5 minutes and answer our questions about X. If people are actively engaging your security team, you've got a good culture going. If they're doing everything they can to avoid your security team, that's probably an indicator of a weaker or perhaps even a more toxic culture. Like
And
we said,
another practical tip on that last one there, before I became a chief information security officer, leading large teams, doing good cybersecurity stuff, my boss was a CISO. And for out of the blue, he asked me a question in one of our meetings. He says, Russell, I know you want to be a CISO. If you were a CISO, if you were sitting in my chair, what advice would you give me? And I'm like, you got to be careful with things like that. But thankfully, in the moment, I gave what I think was a good answer. I said, well, I can't see your calendar right now, and that's fine. But if I could see your calendar, and I could look at your calendar and say, how much time are you spending in your office and our team versus how much time are you spending in someone else's office or being invited to give a briefing or go add some value to a new business initiative. I would say that the more that you're not here, we love you, we're not trying to get rid of you, but we feel like if you could go be an ambassador more and go be that agent of change more and help adjust the culture more, that would be a strong indicator. And I think that really speaks to that of how out there, how involved, how aware of what's important to the business are we as cybersecurity professionals making ourselves.
One of my favorite it's not a good thing, but a good test of your security culture is when there's a security incident. If your security team is all scrambling, trying to point fingers and cover their ass basically to protect their job, we have a toxic culture. Not only a toxic security culture, but a toxic culture. But if the security team quickly comes together and really works to identify the problem and works together to, on the solution to manage the incident, that's a good indicator of a much stronger security culture. So a true test of culture is when there's an incident. So that's why I'm now going to transition to Rekt here in Rekt Casino. When they had an incident, how did they respond to it, and how is that an indication of their culture? So what's interesting is this, and we're going to show you how we know this. Turns out Rekt, for better and or worse, really didn't have a security culture. It's not that there was a bad security culture, people avoiding the security team. It's not that they had a good culture. People loved interacting with the security team. It's that they really had no security team. They had no security policies. They had no security interaction or communication. So it was not that they had a bad security culture or good security culture. It's that there was no security culture, no awareness about security, no awareness about policies. So, and how can Russell and I tell that in an organization? Well, one of the big things we do in the class is talk about not only building strong security cultures and defining them, but measuring them. And we do a deep dive on this on day 3, but one of the things you can do is ask questions. You survey the workforce. And what happened at Rekt Casino is after the incident, they asked questions like these. Now notice when you're asking to get culture, you're asking people, how do you feel? What do you believe? What's your perception? So we were asking the Rekt workforce questions like, how confident are you that you understand and follow our security policies? And the answers we got were like, we have security policies? How often has the security team interacted with you? And they're like, we have a security team? How likely would you be targeted in a phishing attack? And they're like, what's a phishing attack? You know, one of our favorite, look at the last question. How likely is it a coworker would report an incident if they caused it? So when we were asking questions like these, it was not that people said, oh yeah, our policies are really confusing. I hate them. They're really difficult. Bad culture. It was like, yeah, we have no policies. Okay, then we have no security culture. So we have an environment where people are totally unaware they're responsible for security. They have no idea what behaviors to exhibit, how to report, what to look for, what to do, what to think, because there's been no interaction, no security program. Russell, so before we transition to how would we have Rekt Casino build that strong culture, what do you have to add here, Russell?
Yeah, and Lance, I'd say on this one, here's some sample questions that you might choose to use to try to assess that, and treat this like you treat other security metrics. Not just what's the response now, but how does that track over time? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse over time? And then another pro tip I know we talk about in our class is when we ask these questions, we're not saying, hey, Lance, did you do something bad? But maybe you would frame the question to say, hey, Lance, are you aware of anyone who might have done these things? Or do you have a coworker who might have done that? To not make it think like I'm targeting Lance and how I asked that question, but really trying to gather the response from Lance, whether it's him or he's observed a coworker do one or more of these behaviors.
So there's literally an entire science to writing survey questions. So like what Russell was saying, and we go into this in the classes, you don't ask people, have you ever shared your password? No, I've never shared my password. What you do is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how likely is it one of your coworkers has shared their password? Me? Well, never. But my coworker, Russell, he would share it in a heartbeat. And as Russell pointed out, especially with culture, because a lot of this is based on research like the human resources world has done, something called engagement surveys. Culture you track over years. Remember, we said culture is like an iceberg and it's difficult to move. So when you start impacting culture at an organizational level, it's not weeks or months, but it can be tracked in years. All right, so now that we realize we've got a problem, what can we do at Rekt? What can you do at your organization to really build that strong security culture? So what's interesting is both Russell and I, for years now, have been doing a tremendous amount of research on how to do just that. And not only do we have a lot of lessons learned from security programs all over the world, but when it comes to organizational culture and organizational change, there are decades and decades of research on that because this is something businesses and corporations really focus on. How do you create a more innovative culture? How do you develop a culture that loves and adopts and just adapts change? So what ends up happening is we have taken research from numerous authors, scientific papers, research studies, models, Cotter's 8 steps, ADKAR, excuse me, ProSize ADKAR, but research like Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, Thaler and Sunstein's Nudge, Simon Sinek's Starting with Why, Cialdini's Influence. There's so much great research. So Russell and I really took the approach, let's not once again reinvent the wheel. When it comes to culture, there are decades and decades of research in organizational change and culture. Let's take it, condense it, simplify it, and then explain it through the lens of cybersecurity. And that's exactly what we've done with all these different models and frameworks. And when it really comes to impacting your culture, what you want to do is anytime you create policies, processes, procedures, anytime you do a rollout, password managers, VPNs, anytime you do a security initiative, such as single sign-on, EDR, vulnerability management, DevSecOps, you apply these concepts. Culture is not so much rolling out a culture initiative and then you flip that switch. Culture is really driven by your security team's interactions with your workforce, which is those policies, processes, procedures, initiatives, things like that. And it really comes down to motivating change, explaining the why, and ability. In other words, enabling people to do what we ask them to do. The simpler something is, the more likely they do it. So before we just briefly give you, we're going to condense 5 days of training into about 3 or 4 slides. Russell, anything about this?
I think it's so key, Lance, of what you said, of not to go off and invent something in a cave somewhere, but to leverage research and work that's already out there. And just looking at here at the force equals, or looking at motivation times
Yeah.
ability, to really borrow from Isaac Newton's formulas there of mass times acceleration to
Yep.
kind of say, how can we leverage the things that we know, interpret, take the best, and then start to apply it versus trying to figure out these things out on our own. But borrowing from, leveraging, and taking advantage, and also giving a chance for us to, if there is an organizational change or human resource initiatives or company initiatives around culture or strategy to help and do that, you can directly align and start to build that momentum and build those relationships right away.
And what's interesting is, as Russell and I were developing this course, we kept finding ourselves not just talking to security professionals, but also marketing professionals. So we knew how to better sell security, but also human resources, because culture is their job. And so you can see when we say motivation and ability, just like Russell said, we're stealing a lot, no, I shouldn't say stealing, leveraging a lot of great work in other fields, other models, other frameworks. And at the simplest level, one of the key things we want you to be sure to understand is whenever we're communicating to anyone about cybersecurity, it could be an initiative, it could be a policy, we always want to start first with why. And the foundation of this comes from Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. And he explains the golden circle. There's a fantastic TED talk on this that we have students in the class watch. But just go to YouTube, look up Golden Circle, and you're going to have the best 17 minutes of your life. It is life-changing on how you approach cybersecurity. Far too often, whenever we communicate to people about cybersecurity, we're very good about the what and how. Folks, we're rolling out password managers. Starting this week, you have to use password managers. This is what a password manager is. This is how to use it. We never even consider explaining why. Why is that? Curse of knowledge. You and I know what password managers are. We know why we'd want to use them. We assume other people do. They don't. So if you start with the why and really sell them on password managers, the what and the how becomes really, really easy. And we're no longer the enemy inflicting pain in new policies and processes and procedures. We're now their friend. We've made their life so much easier. They no longer have to log in. They no longer have to create new passwords. They no longer have to memorize them. This simple tool does it all for them. We're no longer the enemy, we're the friend. So not only are we improving the security of the organization, but by starting with why, we're starting to build a strong security culture. So that's what we've just done is one slide on an entire day of the class. But Russell, anything else on motivation?
I think being that why child, why are we doing that? Why are we doing that security? Why do I have this training? Why do I have to have multi-factor authentication? Why can't I really look, starting to answer that question over and over and over again can help us say, okay, the reason that we're requiring multi-factor authentication is, the reason that we're doing phishing tests is, can help us better understand and then build all the technologies and all the controls and all the other things that come with it. But really understanding that core area of what's the real reason that we're doing this.
And the key element we focus in the class is when you explain the why, explain it in terms where they benefit. So when Russell said, why do we talk about phishing and do phishing simulations? It's not so we can better manage risk at the company. It's, hey, so when you're at home, you can better detect phishing attacks and protect your bank accounts, your retirement accounts. We're speaking in their terms. Now, on the flip side, too, is the whole idea of ability. And this, surprisingly, is where we actually get culture wrong, and security wrong. Because we tend to focus on motivation. How can we get people excited? Because for you and I, security is simple. Not realizing that for most people, security is really, really painful. So, yes, we focus a lot on motivation, but we teach really where you want to start is look at your policies, processes, and procedures. They may be simple to you and I, but they're really, really painful. And quite often we think people don't follow our policy, processes, and procedures, so we'll just take a bigger bat and beat them harder. When in reality, hey, if we take a step back and looked at our policies, processes, and procedures and simplified them, now we're impacting the organization, making security simpler and ultimately stronger security culture. I love this slide. We stole this from 514.
And on the policy, there's a couple things we can do there. A couple things we could do. Maybe you have to review your policies once a year at some point. What would it look like if you took the policies that you had, you updated them right before you click publish, and you let someone, say in communications or in sales or in marketing, take a look at them, those policies, and say, you know what, if you wanted to follow this policy, is it clear enough that you would know exactly how to do that? And when they tell you that it's not, take their feedback, take their advice to make it so that if someone wants to follow your policy or wants to follow your procedure, that they would be able to do that. Also, make it easy for people to find it. You don't need 45 places, you need one place. Maybe type policy in your browser or some hack like that so that it's easy to see where those policies are at. And then finally, last one is what would it look like when you did your policy reviews if you had a goal to actually remove one of those policies that doesn't relevant or doesn't make any sense anymore. It's not natural for us. We like to add things on, but here's a place where we can help improve our culture by actually removing things that don't make sense anymore.
Password expiration. That might have been good 20 years ago. Do we really need it today? NIST says no. So now is a great time to remove a very painful policy that people don't like. All right, we're running a little bit behind because I'm going to just skip this one and give a great example about policy. Not only do you want to simplify your policy, but communicate it in a way that's simple for people to understand and consume. One of my favorite examples, USAA, one of the largest financial banks in the United States, and for their customer support team, they have a variety of policies, processes, and procedures for customer support to detect and report fraud. USAA is a unique bank that their customer base is primarily US servicemen and servicewomen. So they have their customers, servicemen and servicewomen, are quite often in unique situations. They're calling about a loan and they're currently in Afghanistan, deployed on a mission. So the customer support is used to dealing with a lot of unique situations, but also a lot of fraud. So at USAA, their policies, process, and procedures when it comes to detecting fraud are actually presented as a comic book. They've simplified it, they've made it fun, and as a result, they've become far more effective at detecting fraud. In fact, in the comic book, on the very last page, they identify all these different heroes who have identified fraud in the past and how much they saved USAA. Think about it. Our policies are written from a very tech legal perspective. Most people don't enjoy reading them. And then one other thing we wanted to share with you too is it's not just about policies, processes, procedures. It's about training people using the ADDIE model, learning objectives. Good training is all about, enabling is not only about making security simpler for them, but providing them the training and tools so it's even simpler for them. So for example, with Rekt Casino, one of the problems they had was detecting an incident. If they detected this incident earlier, reduced that dwell time, the impact would have been minimized. So something we can do is not only teach our IT admins and IT ops how to detect the incident, the indicators, but provide them the tools, checklists, cheat sheets, what to look for and how, like this one. Russell, we've just covered a lot on day 3, how to make security simpler, but anything else you'd like to add?
Very briefly, here you're talking about cheat sheets that are available all over the place of things you can do to help the sysadmins when they see something, know how to say something. Another population, what about your whole workforce? What's that one thing, not 15 things, but what's that one thing when someone sees something, it's weird, their mouse is moving and they're not the one moving it? Is there a number to call? Is there a Slack channel to join? Is there a, what's that one way that you want everyone to have in the training and awareness campaigns that you have, so that when they see something, because they go places you can't go, they see things that you just don't get to see, how do you want the whole workforce to engage and notify perhaps your incident response team when something just doesn't quite seem right?
So one of the key things that Russell and I like to emphasize from the class, and we had emphasized to Rekt Casino, is building a strong security culture is not just about motivation, and motivation is a big part, but it's also about making security simple for people. We always think about culture as changing people, but a big part of it is also changing ourselves, changing security so it's simple for people. The simpler we make security, the more likely they do it, but also the more we are seen as a partner, we build that stronger security culture. Like I said, think about your organization right now. How comfortable would people be reporting an incident that they caused? And I'm not just talking about that salesperson that accidentally infects their computer with ransomware. What about that IT admin that forgot to update their the server? And as a result of not updating the server, it gets hacked, and now the organization is going to have to deal with a breach. Is that person going to try to cover that up, or are they going to report it knowing they caused it? So just a good litmus test of your culture. All right. Like we said, this class is part of the Triad. This is why we're so excited, especially in today's world. Organizations are looking for cybersecurity leaders. Yes, we need those technical skills, but we also need the leaders to effectively lead and manage those skilled individuals. And at a high leadership perspective, what we're really finding is a need for an understanding of strategy, technology, and in today's third part, culture. Russell, anything else to add before we go to questions?
The best advice I've ever been given, I know you've heard this a bunch, Lance, is get wisdom as cheaply as you can. Get wisdom as cheaply as you can. And so while we use the Rekt construct over the last 3 and then one more webcast to go this month to set an example of a mythical organization that had some ransomware, our hope and our desire is, from the things we've talked about in class, as well as the things we've talked about today, to help you be able to get that wisdom, to not have you to go through an incident like this, but to kind of pick off a couple of things where you can go and directly apply that back to your respective organization. That's really what Lance and I and Laura and all of SANS wants for you, is that ability to avoid the problems and get the wisdom as cheaply as you can. And we hope that that came through today.
All right. Hey, folks, if you have questions, now's your chance. Laura, what questions do we have? And folks, by the way, if you want to ask Russell or I anything afterwards, just go ahead and shoot us an email. Let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and type my email address in the chat channel. And Russell, when you get a chance, go ahead and do the same thing.
Yep.
We'd love to hear from you.
Great. So since we're on the Triad, we'll start with that question. It is there a recommended order for taking Management 512, Management 514, and Management 521? And I will say I did answer it as that there's no prerequisite from one to the other. So it really depends on your role, your current strengths and weaknesses, and your future needed priorities. But I would love to hear your answer as well.
Yeah, I would say when you're looking at it, it depends on where you are in your leadership journey. Are you a leader of yourself? Are you a manager leading a smaller team? Are you an executive leading perhaps a large security organization, maybe a CISO, director, et cetera? I think that can help to determine where that might be most beneficial. Leading some teams, larger teams, et cetera. The great thing about the classes there, all the classes, not just these 3, is You go to the SANS portal, you can click, I think the button's called free excerpt, and you literally get a free hour of training from these classes that you can help use that to supplement your decision making from which one is most appropriate for either where you are, what your needs are, or perhaps where you want to be in your security leadership journey. Lance, how about you?
I would argue it's a triad. It's not tiered. So the order probably really doesn't matter as much. What I would do is this, honestly, because I teach 2 of the classes, having taken 3 of them, all 3 of them. Take the one that interests you the most, the first. If one doesn't stand out like I should take that, whichever one the first, and you're going to see all 3 are interconnected, all 3 reference each other, but it's not a tiered model, it's a triad model. It's more like a puzzle and all the pieces come together. So they complement each other, they don't build on each other.
Perfect. The next question is, this was from earlier on in the presentation. I'm not sure exactly which slide it referenced. Do you have a survey template or tool to go out and assess this part of how people feel?
So yes, it's actually in the course digital download package, which I'm happy to share with you folks here. What happens is, as part of the course, one of the things we do is we have a digital download package that references all these different resources and materials that we talk about in the class. And one of them is an example template of what a survey can look like. Now, this survey template is not as structured. We do another dive in how to create a more structured one using something called the Likert scale. But the one in there can definitely give you an idea of what to do. So it's called mgt521.org. So you'll find examples like the surveys in there. And I just posted it to the chat channel.
Wonderful. And those are all the questions that we have.
Oh man, we're getting over easy.
We are, yeah.
We hope that all of you will join us again next week for the panel discussion with Lance, Joe Sullivan, and Kevin Garvey as they wrap up this series and how these different concepts come together to make a transformational cybersecurity leader. So Lance and Russell, thank you so much for being with us today. And we hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, folks. Thanks so much.
See you, everybody. Thanks so much.